What if the town you thought was safe was hiding a terrifying secret that no one dared speak about? A place where every friendly smile hides a chilling past, and every quiet street whispers with fear. Welcome to Harrison Hills, where the truth isn't just buried, it's carefully guarded until now. If you're ready to dive into the darkness and uncover the secrets of Harrison Hills, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps us going, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Part 1. The Unsettling Beginnings of Pine Hill. Pine Hill, a town that time seemed to forget, nestled between winding roads and dense, shadowy forests. If you passed through it, you'd miss it. A blink and you miss it kind of place. People rarely stayed here for long. Tourists glanced at the rusted sign on the outskirts, and locals knew not to draw attention to the dark corners of their lives. Pine Hill was as quiet as it was secretive. It wasn't a place that shouted for attention, but in its silence, it hid something far worse than anyone could imagine. The people here would smile, wave, but their eyes told a different story. And in a town like Pine Hill, that silence was something people lived with, accepted even. You wouldn't notice anything off at first, just small things, whispers between neighbors, the weird stories the older folk would tell. They spoke in hushed tones, not wanting to reveal too much, but it was clear that something was always lurking beneath the surface. I moved to Pine Hill just a few months ago, looking for a quiet place to start over. At the time, I didn't know that quietness would be the very thing that would haunt me. I had no plans to stay forever, just a short break from city life. The first thing that struck me about Pine Hill was how it looked like a postcard, charming, peaceful, and almost nostalgic. Old houses with porches that creaked when the wind blew. The town square had a small grocery store, a diner with cracked vinyl booths, and a post office that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 70s. It seemed perfect. But there was something in the air here that wasn't right. It wasn't just the long, unbroken stretches of trees that enveloped the town. It was something deeper, something embedded in the soil, in the lives of the people. Pine Hill had a history, a past that didn't want to stay buried. The first time I felt it was during my second week here. I was walking down Main Street when I saw the small, dilapidated chapel. It was tucked behind the rows of houses, overgrown with ivy and forgotten by most. There was an unsettling aura around the place, a strange heaviness that seemed to cling to the very walls. I'd seen it from a distance, but today, for reasons I couldn't explain, I walked closer. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. No fresh flowers, no signs of life. The windows were blackened, stained, and cracked. As I walked past the church, I heard the faint sound of bells ringing, though the church had no bell tower. The sound was muffled, like it was coming from deep underground. I paused, but it stopped as suddenly as it started. My heart pounded for a moment, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. It had to be. Later that evening, I met a local at the diner. Her name was Clara, a friendly woman in her 50s. She seemed to know everyone in town, or at least, that's what I thought. But when I mentioned the old chapel, her face went pale, and she quickly changed the subject. It was then I realized that the people here were not as open as they seemed. There was something they weren't saying, something they were deliberately avoiding. Over the next few days, my curiosity grew, and I began hearing more stories. Everyone had a story about Pine Hill. Some said it was haunted, that the chapel was cursed, that terrible things had happened there. People avoided talking about it in public, but when they thought no one was listening, the whispers were clear. There were things in the town that shouldn't be talked about, things that no one wanted to remember. I could feel it now, the weight of the past pressing down on me, the sense that there was more to this place than met the eye. Pine Hill was hiding its secrets, and as much as I wanted to ignore it, I could feel them creeping closer, reaching out to me. I had no idea just how deep those secrets ran, or how dangerous it would be to uncover them. But then something happened that changed everything. One evening, as I walked back to my house, I noticed a figure standing near the chapel, bathed in the pale moonlight. It was an old man, his face hidden in the shadows, but his eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. The air around me seemed to freeze, and for a moment I couldn't move, couldn't look away from him. He didn't speak, but his presence felt suffocating, like he was waiting for something, waiting for me. I didn't wait to find out. I turned and walked away quickly, my heart racing in my chest. But even as I hurried home, I could feel his eyes following me, burning into my back. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I asked around about the man, but no one knew who he was. And the chapel, as if it had never existed, seemed even more abandoned than before. No one ever mentioned it again, as if it had disappeared from the town's collective memory. That's when I knew Pine Hill wasn't just a sleepy town. It was a town hiding something, something darker than I could have ever imagined. This is the beginning of the journey that will lead deeper into the mysteries and horrors of Pine Hill. What unfolds from here is a descent into a small town's buried past, filled with secrets, dark rituals, and a force that will not be ignored. Stay with me as we unravel what lies beneath this seemingly quiet town. Part 2. The Chapel's Silent Secrets. Pine Hill seemed like any other small, quiet town at first glance, but I soon realized it was anything but ordinary. That night, after seeing the figure by the chapel, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The town had always felt a bit off, but now it felt suffocating, like the air itself was thick with something unseen, something old. I tried to ignore it, but no matter how hard I tried, the unease gnawed at me. The next few days passed uneventfully, but every time I passed the chapel, I couldn't help but glance at the darkened windows as if someone, might be watching me from within. I walked by the place more often now, unable to stop myself. There was a magnetic pull to it. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I was certain there was something waiting there, something important, something terrifying. Then one afternoon, I saw something I wasn't prepared for. I had been walking down Oak Street when I saw a familiar face in the crowd, Clara, the woman from the diner. She was walking toward the chapel, her head down, looking uneasy, almost like she didn't want to be seen. But what caught my attention was the bundle she was carrying. It was wrapped in dark cloth, held tight in her hands like it was something precious, something fragile. Curiosity got the best of me, and I followed her from a distance, keeping to the shadows so I wouldn't be noticed. She walked straight to the chapel and disappeared inside. The door creaked open and shut, the sound echoing in the silent air, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. I couldn't tell if it was fear or excitement, maybe both. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but when Clara finally came out, the bundle was gone. She was walking back towards the main street, her expression distant, almost vacant. Her eyes avoided mine, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw a flicker of fear in her gaze. When she passed me, she looked like she had aged years in just a few hours. I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was in that bundle. My legs moved before I could even think it through, and I made my way to the chapel, my steps growing faster and more frantic as I neared the door. The chapel was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I pushed the door open, half expecting it to creak loudly, but instead it swung open with no sound at all, like the building itself didn't want anyone to enter. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old wood and stale incense. The pews were arranged in a strange, almost ritualistic manner, all facing inward, as if someone, something, was expected to sit at the center. At first, I saw nothing unusual, but then my eyes were drawn to the far corner, where the light barely touched the floor. There, lying in a small pile near the altar, was something I'll never forget. It was a small, dark bundle, just like the one Clara had carried, and it looked as though it had been left there, abandoned. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. As I crouched down to examine it, I felt a chill run through my body, a wave of nausea that made my stomach turn. The bundle wasn't cloth. It was hair. Long strands of dark, matted hair tangled together, twisted into a grotesque shape. I could barely make out the shape of a head at the center of the mass. I recoiled, a feeling of dread flooding my veins. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. But what was it? I stumbled back, my hand brushing against a cold stone wall as I tried to steady myself. Then I heard it. A whisper, soft and low, as if it came from somewhere deep beneath the earth. It was unintelligible, but it felt like a command, a beckoning. I turned and fled from the chapel, my heart pounding so loudly in my ears I thought I might faint. As I burst into the daylight, I took in deep breaths, gasping for air, trying to clear my mind of the horror I had just witnessed. I had to get away, I had to leave. But no matter how fast I walked, I could still feel the chapel's presence behind me, its shadow stretching over everything. The next few days were filled with unease. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just an old chapel, abandoned and decaying. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that bundle. I heard the whispers. I felt the cold that had seeped into my bones, the sensation that something ancient and malevolent was watching, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that Pine Hill was hiding something, something dark and terrible. The more I tried to push it away, the more it clung to me like a weight on my chest. The people of Pine Hill weren't just avoiding the truth, they were terrified of it. But then, one evening, I received a call that would change everything. It was Clara. Her voice was shaking, barely a whisper. "You need to leave. They're watching you. They've seen you, and they'll never stop until they get what they want." I didn't have time to ask what she meant before the line went dead. The next morning, I went to the diner, desperate for answers. But when I arrived, it was as if the entire town had disappeared. The streets were silent, the windows of the buildings covered with boards, like they were preparing for a storm. The diner was dark, its door locked tight. I knocked, but no one answered. Then, through the cracked window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Clara was sitting in the booth, but she wasn't alone. There were other people in the diner sitting in the shadows, their faces obscured. They were watching me. I turned and ran. As I ran through the streets, my mind raced. What had happened? Why was the town suddenly silent? And what had Clara meant when she said, "They're watching you"? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. Pine Hill wasn't a town where secrets stayed hidden for long. I was being pulled into something, something I couldn't escape. And whatever it wasn't done with me yet. Part 3. The town's hidden truths. The silence in Pine Hill had grown deafening. After the terrifying incident at the chapel, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was being followed, if something was always just behind me, lurking in the shadows. Clara's words echoed in my head, "They're watching you," and I couldn't shake the thought that I was being drawn into something dark, something ancient. Over the next few days, I tried to act like everything was normal. I went to work, tried to go about my day, but every time I passed the chapel, I could feel it pulling me in, as if I were walking into the heart of something sinister. Pine Hill wasn't just a quiet town anymore. It felt like a cage, a town full of people who knew too much and refused to speak. I couldn't understand why they wouldn't tell me what was really happening here, why they didn't want me to know the truth. I couldn't ignore the growing tension any longer. I needed to find answers, to uncover what was hidden beneath Pine Hill's peaceful facade. That evening, I walked past the chapel again, but this time, something felt different. The air was colder, heavier, as if the very town itself was holding its breath. I walked closer, my feet moving on their own, driven by an insatiable need to know. The chapel's door was slightly ajar, the faintest creak echoing as I pushed it open. The familiar scent of old wood and dust hit me immediately, but there was something else too, a sharp, metallic tang in the air, like blood. My heart raced in my chest as I stepped inside. Everything looked exactly as it had before, but there was a difference. The floor, the walls, everything felt alive, like the chapel had taken on a presence of its own. The shadows in the corners seemed darker than usual, almost as if they were watching me, waiting for me to make a move. I walked to the altar, my eyes scanning the room. That's when I saw it. On the altar, there was a small black box. It hadn't been there before. Its edges were jagged as if it had been hastily carved, and it had strange symbols scratched into the sides. Symbols I didn't recognize. My fingers itched to touch it, but at the same time, something inside me screamed to turn around and run. I ignored that voice. With trembling hands, I reached for the box. The moment I touched it, the air around me seemed to tighten, and I felt a sharp chill race down my spine. The box was heavier than I expected, and it felt wrong, too wrong. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the box itself was alive, pulsing with something ancient and evil. As I lifted the box, the shadows around the chapel seemed to stir. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something was approaching. A cold whisper slid across my skin, and I instinctively turned around. But there was no one there. Then I heard it. A faint whisper, almost unintelligible, coming from the walls themselves. My heart skipped a beat as I stepped back, my mind racing. I had to get out of here. I had to leave before whatever was in this chapel consumed me. But as I reached for the door, the whispers grew louder, almost frantic, like the walls themselves were trying to tell me something. And then I saw it. A shadow moved in the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, it was gone. But the feeling of being watched intensified, as though something was standing just behind me, breathing down my neck. I could feel its presence, cold and malevolent. It was waiting for me to make a mistake. I rushed out of the chapel, the door slamming shut behind me with a deafening crack. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I felt like I had narrowly escaped something terrible, something I couldn't quite comprehend. But the nightmare didn't end there. The next day, Clara vanished. I hadn't seen her since the night at the chapel, and at first I thought maybe she'd left town, trying to escape whatever strange forces were lurking in Pine Hill. But when I spoke to people, no one had seen her leave. The diner was quieter than usual, and the atmosphere felt heavier, like a storm was on the horizon. I decided to visit her house. When I arrived, I knocked several times, but there was no answer. The door was slightly ajar, so I pushed it open, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside, the house was eerily still, too still. The lights were off, and everything seemed untouched, as if Clara had simply vanished. As I walked through the house, my eyes fell on a strange detail. The same bundle of dark cloth that Clara had been carrying the day she disappeared was lying on the living room floor, abandoned. The cloth was frayed at the edges, and I could see something dark and wet seeping through, staining the carpet beneath. I reached for it, but my hand stopped just above it, as if a cold hand was holding me back. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I backed away from the cloth, my pulse racing, and hurried out of the house. But the worst part wasn't what I saw. It was the note I found on the kitchen table. It was hastily written, The ink smudged and uneven, but the message was clear. You were never supposed to find it. Leave now before it finds you. The words felt like a curse, a warning, and a threat all at once. It was too late to run now. Whatever was happening in Pine Hill, it was pulling me in, and there was no escaping it. I was trapped in a town of secrets and shadows, where the past bled into the present, and the whispers in the walls weren't just figments of imagination. They were real, and they were coming for me. I knew that I had to leave, but the fear of what would follow kept me rooted in place. The only thing I could do was wait for the next move in this twisted game that Pine Hill had trapped me in. The answers were buried in the town's past, and they would stop at nothing to keep me from uncovering them. But I couldn't stop. I had to know. Part 4. The Unseen Forces of Pine Hill. The town of Pine Hill had always seemed like a peaceful, quiet place. It was the kind of town where nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. A place where neighbors smiled and waved at each other, where the streets were lined with modest homes, and where the trees provided just the right amount of shade in the summer. But with every passing day, Pine Hill became something different, a place where every corner felt haunted by something unseen, something far darker than I had ever imagined. After Clara's disappearance, the weight of dread hung heavier in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to uncover whatever the town had hidden for so long. The more I dug, the deeper I sank into the town's twisted history, as if each step forward only led me further into the darkness that lurked beneath its surface. There were whispers, rumors, but no one seemed willing to speak openly about what was really going on. I went back to the chapel, the place where I first felt the overwhelming presence that seemed to breathe down my neck. This time the door wasn't just slightly ajar, it was wide open. I hesitated, standing at the threshold, the air cold against my skin as if the building itself was exhaling a long, weary sigh. I stepped inside. The chapel was quiet, but the kind of quiet that felt wrong. There was no peace here, no comfort. The silence was suffocating, thick with something ancient and oppressive. I had thought that leaving the town would somehow free me from the shadows, but I was wrong. Whatever was here, whatever had a hold of Pine Hill, was rooted deep in the land itself, and it wasn't going to let me leave so easily. I moved forward slowly, cautiously, my feet echoing off the wooden floor. The altar was untouched, but the atmosphere felt alive, like the walls were closing in. It felt like the very structure of the chapel was alive, watching, listening, waiting for me to make a mistake. I could sense it, a force just beyond the veil of perception, something that lived within the shadows, something that I couldn't see but could feel closing in on me. My eyes fell on the pews. They were still in place, but something was different. They were arranged in a perfect circle around the altar, and in the center of the circle was a strange, carved symbol, deeply etched into the floorboards, as if something had clawed its way into the wood, leaving a mark of its presence. I knelt down, my fingers brushing over the grooves of the symbol. The air around me grew colder, and the feeling that I was not alone intensified. It was then that I noticed something on the altar, a book, old and worn, its leather cover cracked with age. It wasn't there before. My hands shook as I reached for it, my heart hammering in my chest. The moment my fingers touched the cover, the temperature in the room plummeted. A gust of wind surged through the chapel, rattling the windows. I opened the book, the pages yellowed with time. The handwriting inside was messy, frantic, as if whoever had written it was in a rush. The first page read, "They are always watching. We were not meant to disturb them. I have sealed the door, but they know. They know." The words sent a chill down my spine. What door? Who were they? And what had these people in Pine Hill done that they were so afraid of? I flipped through the pages, each filled with similar cryptic notes, written in desperation. It was clear that something had happened in this town, something that no one wanted to talk about. Whoever had written these words was trying to warn me, trying to protect me from something that was buried deep in the history of Pine Hill. But the more I read, the more I realized that I was being pulled into something I didn't fully understand. I had thought I was uncovering secrets, but now I was wondering if I was digging too deep. The deeper I went, the more the darkness seemed to close in around me. I closed the book and stood up, my mind reeling. I couldn't stay in this chapel any longer. The air was thick with malevolent energy, and I felt as though I was suffocating. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I saw something that stopped me cold. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure. A man tall and gaunt, his face obscured by shadow. He didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel his presence. It was like he was watching me, studying me, waiting for me to make my next move. My heart raced and I backed away, my eyes fixed on him. But just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. The door slammed shut behind me, and I stumbled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I stood there for a moment, unable to move, my mind racing. I had seen him. He was real, and he had been waiting for me. I ran from the chapel, my feet pounding the earth beneath me, the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. When I finally reached my car, I didn't stop to think. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and started the engine. I had to leave. Pine Hill was not a town meant for outsiders like me. And whatever dark forces had a grip on this place, I was no longer willing to play their game. But as I sped away, I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time. And there, standing at the edge of the road, was the figure again, watching. Waiting. I didn't look back after that. I couldn't. But I knew one thing for sure. Pine Hill had secrets, and no matter how far I ran, they were never going to let me go. Part 5. The Hidden Door of Pine Hill. The road away from Pine Hill felt like a blur. I drove without looking back, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the rush of wind outside. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of those eyes, those cold, empty eyes that had followed me from the chapel, lingering in my thoughts even as I tried to escape. I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time, and for a moment I thought I saw something move in the trees along the roadside. I shook my head and forced myself to keep driving. I had barely made it to the outskirts of town when I realized that Pine Hill had already gotten under my skin. There was something about the place, something in the air that had followed me, something I couldn't put my finger on. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that leaving wasn't going to erase the shadows. The mysterious figure in the chapel, the strange symbols carved into the floor, the eerie book filled with cryptic warnings, none of it made sense. But as I sat there in the car, somewhere between the fading sunlight and the growing darkness of the forest, I knew deep down that I had only uncovered the surface of something far worse than I could comprehend. Pine Hill wasn't just haunted by ghosts. It was something older, something darker, something that thrived on secrets. I tried to call home, to reach out to my family, to tell them everything, but the moment I picked up my phone, the signal dropped. I tried again, nothing. The phone was dead. Panic began to rise in my chest, but I kept my eyes on the road. I couldn't afford to panic, not now. I pushed through the unease and kept driving, the trees growing denser on either side of the road as the night settled in. I had to get away from Pine Hill, but something told me that it wasn't going to be that simple. The car began to sputter as I made my way deeper into the forest. The engine whined before cutting off completely, leaving me stranded on a dark, empty road with no cell service and no way to move forward. The eerie quiet of the forest surrounded me, and for the first time since I had left Pine Hill, I felt completely alone. I stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin, and checked the hood. The engine had overheated, nothing I could fix on my own. I cursed under my breath, looking around for any sign of civilization. But all I could see were the dark, looming trees that seemed to swallow up everything around them. I tried the car's lights, but they flickered weakly before dying altogether. My stomach churned as I realized how isolated I really was. There was no one around, and the longer I stood there, the more I felt the weight of something heavy in the air, a presence that seemed to be drawing closer. Just as I was about to get back in the car, a flicker of movement caught my eye, something darting between the trees. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I tried to focus on the shape, but it was gone before I could make out what it was. It moved too quickly, like something unnatural. I hurried back into the car and locked the doors. The night outside felt suffocating, as if the forest was pressing in on me from all sides. I glanced around the interior of the car, trying to calm my nerves. That's when I saw it on the passenger seat, partially hidden behind the glove compartment, was a piece of paper. I hadn't seen it before. The faint sound of paper sliding across the seat caught my attention, and I picked it up cautiously. It was a single sheet, folded in half. The handwriting on it was hurried, the ink smeared in places as though the writer had been in a rush. It read, "You shouldn't have left. They are watching. The road is a trap. The door is always open." I felt my blood run cold. My heart started to pound in my chest as I looked around the car, my eyes darting nervously from one corner to the other. Who had left this note? Who was watching me? I couldn't stay here. I had to get out of this place, and I had to do it now. I shoved the note into my pocket and turned the key in the ignition. The car sputtered and started, the engine roaring to life just as I began to pull away. The road stretched ahead of me, but now it felt like it was never-ending. The trees seemed to close in tighter, the darkness becoming thicker with every passing second. I tried to focus on the headlights, but they seemed to barely cut through the night, like the light itself was being swallowed by the forest. I drove faster, my hands tightening around the wheel, my knuckles pale. But no matter how fast I went, the road seemed to stretch on forever. And then, just as I thought I was losing my mind, I saw it. A shape up ahead, standing by the side of the road, unmoving. A man. Tall, thin, wearing a black coat that seemed to absorb the light from the headlights. His face was obscured by the shadows, but I could feel his eyes on me, staring into me, watching every move I made. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal and the car lurched forward, my heart in my throat. The man didn't move. He just stood there, watching as I sped past him, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a brief moment I thought I saw him standing in the middle of the road, his hand raised like he was trying to stop me. But when I looked again, he was gone. My hands were shaking as I continued down the road, the fear of the unknown gnawing at me. What had just happened? Was it just a trick of the mind? Was it just exhaustion, the result of too many sleepless nights? Or had I really just seen something, someone that shouldn't have been there? And that's when I heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from the back of the car. I tried to ignore it, but it grew louder with every passing second, until it felt like someone was knocking on the windows. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a face staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the empty road behind me. I drove faster, the tapping growing louder, more insistent, until it felt like it was coming from inside the car, like the walls were closing in. The fear surged and I slammed my foot on the gas, desperate to outrun whatever was haunting me. But no matter how fast I drove, the tapping never stopped. It followed me, always just a breath behind, as if something was reaching for me from the shadows. As I finally reached the edge of Pine Hill, the tapping stopped. The forest behind me fell silent, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could hear the sound of my own breath. I had made it out. But deep down, I knew something was still waiting for me. Part 6. The Unseen Presence. I thought I had escaped. I thought leaving Pine Hill behind would give me the freedom I had desperately sought. The forest, the strange man by the side of the road, the tapping, those were all behind me, right? But as I drove through the winding, empty roads, the feeling of being followed didn't go away. It crept up on me like the chill of the early morning, just enough to make my skin prickle, but not enough to be fully noticed at first. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, just my mind still reeling from everything I had witnessed, but every instinct I had screamed that something wasn't right. The town of Pine Hill and everything it held was still with me. I had made it to a nearby town to try and regroup. A small, seemingly innocuous place, Elkford. The gas station attendant gave me a half-smile when I filled up, and the small-town charm of it all almost made me believe that I had outrun whatever curse had followed me. But then, as I drove into the heart of Elkford, I passed a small park. The swing set was eerily still, the empty benches forgotten. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't stop to look, but something about that moment stuck with me. I needed to get out of the car. I couldn't just keep driving, trying to outrun the unease that had crept in with me. I pulled into a small, run-down motel just on the edge of town. The neon vacancy sign buzzed faintly in the dark, casting an unsettling glow over the empty parking lot. I went inside, checked in, and made my way to the room without a word to the indifferent clerk. The room was basic, 2 single beds, a shabby TV, and a small desk cluttered with motel brochures. I tried to shake off the strange feeling that had taken hold of me, but it only grew stronger the longer I sat in the silence. I stared at the walls, the cheap wallpaper peeling at the edges, and felt the emptiness of the room seep into my bones. It felt like a place that had been waiting for someone to come, waiting for me to come. I tried to distract myself, flipping through channels on the TV, but the static sound of the TV only heightened the sense of dread. That's when I saw it, a flash of light in the corner of my eye. The window was slightly ajar, enough to let in the night breeze, but as I looked toward it, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. A shadow. A figure standing just beyond the window, its face obscured by the darkness but its presence unmistakable. My breath caught, and for a moment I froze, unable to move. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, the shadow was gone. Nothing but the dark outline of trees in the distance. The room felt colder, the air heavy with the weight of something unseen. I rushed to the window, but by the time I pulled back the curtains, there was nothing there, just the emptiness of the night. It was then I realized I had never truly escaped. The shadow in the window wasn't an illusion. It was the same presence that had followed me from Pine Hill, and it was here now in Elkford. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but the signal was dead. I checked again, and the same dead signal stared back at me. That's when the power went out, everything plunged into darkness. A low hum filled the air, like a distant whisper on the wind, something almost too quiet to be heard. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled again. This wasn't normal. I heard footsteps, faint and echoing, coming from the hallway outside my room. The door was locked, but I felt a strange compulsion to check it, to make sure it was still secure. I moved cautiously toward the door, the feeling of being watched growing more intense with every step. When I reached the door, I didn't touch the handle. Instead, I pressed my ear to the cold wood. I could hear something, or rather someone, moving just outside. A low whisper, a voice too faint to make out. Then came the sound of knocking. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I recoiled in horror, my heart pounding as the knocking grew louder, closer. It was unmistakable. It was the sound I had heard back at Pine Hill. The tapping. The eerie, unsettling tapping that had haunted me since I left. I grabbed my jacket, moved quickly to the window, and threw it open. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I couldn't stay in that room, in that darkness, with whatever it was that was waiting outside. That's when I saw it. A figure in the parking lot standing under the flickering light of a nearby street lamp. The tall man, the same figure I had seen back in Pine Hill. The same cold, dead eyes. The tapping stopped. The figure stood completely still, its head tilted as if listening to the silence, waiting. And then, just like that, it began to walk toward me. I slammed the window shut, but it was too late. I felt it. The presence, the feeling of being suffocated by something dark and ancient. I backed away from the window, my body frozen in fear. The figure moved with an unnatural grace, its long arms hanging loosely at its sides. It was moving faster now, but it was still too far away for me to run. The power cut out again, plunging the room into absolute darkness. I could hear the sound of my heartbeat in my ears, feel the cold sweat forming on my skin. I scrambled to my feet, searching the room for any escape. I tried the door, but it wouldn't open. It felt as if it was being held shut from the other side. The force on the other side was too strong, too persistent. I was trapped. The only thing I could do was wait. The man's footsteps stopped, but I could still feel him there just outside the door, listening, waiting. The silence was unbearable, heavy in the air like the promise of something terrible. I held my breath, trying to control my panic, but the tension was suffocating. And then, in the silence, I heard a whisper. "It's time for you to come back." I don't know how much time passed after that, but the door creaked open. No one was there. The hallway was empty. The only thing that remained was the cold air from the trees beyond, slipping through the cracks of the door. I never stayed another night in that motel. I left as soon as the sun rose, never to return to Elkford. But I know the truth now. It never ends. Whatever is following me, whatever is pulling me back, will always be there. Pine Hill isn't just a place. It's a shadow that follows you everywhere. And no matter how far you run, it will always find you. Part 7. The Return of the Forgotten. I thought I had outrun it. I thought that by leaving Elkford, I could leave the shadow, the tapping, the feeling of being watched behind me. But the truth I had to face was far darker than I could ever have imagined. You can't outrun something that has always been waiting for you. It wasn't until I got back to my apartment, far away from the forests, the cursed town, and the memories, that I realized how deeply the roots of whatever hunted me had truly embedded themselves. The unease I had felt in Elkford was nothing compared to the suffocating terror I now experienced daily. In the days following my departure, I started noticing oddities. The clock on my wall started ticking backward at random intervals. At first, I brushed it off as a faulty battery, but then it started to tick faster, almost too quickly, a maddening speed. Then, the lights in my apartment would flicker on and off in a pattern that didn't make sense. And that strange humming, that low, persistent noise I had heard back at the motel, began to creep back in, echoing through the walls. I thought I was imagining it, but then, one evening, I found a note taped to my door. There was no return address, no signature, just a simple message in black ink. "We are waiting for you to come home." My heart stopped in my chest. I tore the note from the door and slammed it shut behind me, trying to shake the feeling of panic crawling up my spine. But it was already too late. I could feel it in my bones, the presence. It was here, in my apartment, and it was only a matter of time before I'd have to face it again. The air around me felt thick with something, like the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes staring at me from every corner of my apartment. I could no longer sleep, no longer eat, no longer live a normal life. Every time I looked out my window, I saw them. The figures standing in the distance just beyond the streetlights, always watching. But every time I blinked, they were gone. And yet, the feeling of being watched never left. I had become trapped in an invisible cage. It was like I was no longer living in the world I knew, but something darker, something twisted. Every time I passed a mirror, I thought I saw glimpses of figures standing behind me, shadows that moved when I didn't. In the corner of my eye, I could catch them for a split second, but when I turned to look, they were gone. But I knew they were there. The very air seemed to hum with their presence, an oppressive force I couldn't escape. I had to find answers. I had to know what was hunting me, what I had stumbled into. And that's when I started seeing the signs again, the same ones that had haunted me in Pine Hill. The figures, the whispered words in the silence, the strange symbols that seemed to crop up in the places I visited. It was all connected, I realized. This thing wasn't just following me, it was pulling me closer, drawing me into its web. I began to research everything I could find about the town of Pine Hill, the forest, the symbols I had seen, anything that could explain what was happening to me. That's when I found it. In the deepest archives of the local library's records, I uncovered an article from the early 1900s, something buried deep in the forgotten pages. The article described a strange phenomenon, a series of disappearances that had plagued Pine Hill for decades. Young people, children mostly, had vanished without a trace, much like Lena, Jordan, Casey, and countless others. And in each case, the same eerie photograph appeared, always with a fourth frame that no one could explain. The article didn't just talk about the disappearances. It described something much darker, something far worse. In the town's founding, there was mention of an old cult that had come to Pine Hill, a cult that believed the town was a gateway to a darker world. They had used the woods surrounding Pine Hill as a sacred place, performing rituals and sacrifices to an ancient, unnamed entity they worshipped in secret. The cult believed that the more people they sacrificed to this entity, the stronger the bond would grow between this world and the next. The photographs, I realized, were not mere accidents. They were part of a much older, far more sinister ritual. The fourth frame, the one that had always captured the strange man standing behind us, was part of this cult's trap. It wasn't just a photograph, it was a doorway. It was a doorway that allowed whatever haunted Pine Hill to cross into our world. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was next, that I had already been marked. The chilling truth was clear now. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to stop until it had taken every last one of us. And I had already been in the fourth frame. With each passing night, the presence in my apartment grew stronger. The shadows moved with a will of their own, and the hum in the air became deafening. The whispers in the dark turned into voices I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was real. Some force was calling to me, pulling me back to Pine Hill. It wasn't letting go. I needed to face whatever it was that haunted me. The photograph, the strange man, the figures that had followed me from the woods. It was all part of this larger force, this ancient entity that had been waiting. That night, after hours of searching through the records and the endless research, I decided to go back to Pine Hill. I didn't want to. I was terrified, but I knew it was the only way to end it. I couldn't run anymore. I grabbed the crumpled photograph, the one with the fourth frame, the one with the strange man in the background, and I left for the last time. When I arrived, the town was just as I remembered it. Quiet, empty. The same eerie silence that always seemed to hang in the air. I drove past the fairgrounds, now a shadow of what it used to be. I could still hear the whispers, still feel the eyes on me, but I had come to finish it. I went straight to the spot where the old photo booth had stood. It was gone now, just like everything else, leaving nothing behind but the decaying remnants of a once-forgotten town. But I knew it wasn't gone. It was still there somewhere watching, and that's when I saw it. The shadow of a man standing in the distance waiting, not in the photo anymore, but in reality. It was time to confront it, time to face whatever was pulling me back, time to put an end to it. The man who had haunted me, the darkness that had consumed everyone, was waiting, and I knew then as I walked toward him that there was no turning back. Part 8. The final confrontation. As I stood there, the chill of the night wrapping itself around me, I could feel the pull, a magnetic force drawing me closer to the man. The figure in the distance didn't move, yet I knew he was aware of my presence. It was as if he had been waiting for me all along. My breath hitched, my heart racing in my chest as I stepped forward, each step heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. The strange force had guided me here, and now it was time to face it. The town of Pine Hill felt abandoned, but I could still feel the presence of those who had come before me. The memories of the townsfolk who had disappeared, the whispers of those who were swallowed by the darkness, lingered in the air like an unspoken curse. I knew that they had all been caught in the same trap, the same cycle. I was no different. I reached the place where the photo booth had once stood. The ground was cold, barren. Only an empty space remained, the place where we had all been trapped. My fingers trembled as I pulled out the crumpled photograph from my jacket pocket. The fourth frame was the key, the catalyst for everything that had happened. And as I held it in my hands, I couldn't help but wonder, what if I was too late? What if the entity had already claimed me? I glanced at the man in the distance. He was tall, his features indistinct, just like in the photo. His eyes, those same hollow eyes, were fixed on me, never blinking, never moving. His face was expressionless, but there was a chilling familiarity about him. I had seen him before, not just in the photo, but in my dreams, in the corners of my mind. He had been stalking me, manipulating me, pulling me closer with each passing day. "You came," the man's voice echoed, as if it had come from everywhere at once. His words were not spoken aloud, but rather implanted in my mind, like a seed taking root in my thoughts. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Every part of me screamed to turn around, to run, to escape from this nightmare, but I knew I had no choice. This was my fate. I had been marked long ago. "You can't run from it," the man continued, his voice both soothing and terrifying. "The town never forgets." And neither do I. I closed my eyes, willing myself to gather the courage to speak, but nothing came. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat, the deafening silence of the world around me. It felt like I was drowning in it, suffocated by the weight of everything that had led me here. But then I remembered the photo, the figure behind us in the fourth frame, the hand reaching out toward us. Toward Lena, Jordan, Casey, toward me. That was the key. The trap. The photo was the doorway, the point of no return. I raised my hands, trembling as I held the photo out in front of me, facing it toward the man. The wind picked up, the trees groaning in the distance as if the forest itself was alive, watching. And in that moment, something inside me broke free. "You were never supposed to come back," the man whispered, his voice colder now. "This is your prison, just like it was theirs." The moment the words left his lips, everything changed. The photo in my hands began to ripple, like water disturbed by an unseen force. The edges of the photograph began to blur, the figure in the background becoming more defined, its hand still reaching toward us. But now, as I stared into the photo, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, something new. Behind the man in the photo was a doorway, a dark, twisting passage that seemed to stretch on forever, a passage I had never seen before, a passage that seemed to beckon me into its depths. "This is how it ends," the man said, stepping forward now, his presence pressing down on me, suffocating me. His hand reached out and the air seemed to thicken around me. One by one they all come. One by one they all go. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't just the man. It wasn't just the photograph. This was something older, something far more ancient than I could comprehend. The town of Pine Hill had been built on something dark, something that fed on the memories of the past, on the souls it had taken. And now it was trying to claim me. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to plan. I only knew that I had to stop it. I had to break the cycle. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I hurled the photo toward the man, watching as it flew through the air. Time seemed to slow, the world around me holding its breath. As the photo reached the man, the world exploded in a burst of light, blinding me. For a moment, I felt weightless, as though I was floating above the earth, suspended between two worlds. Then the light faded and I found myself standing alone in the middle of the fairgrounds, the man gone, the darkness lifting. The silence was deafening. The air felt clearer now, less oppressive, but I knew better than to think it was over. The photograph was gone, but the memories, the darkness, still lingered. I had stopped the entity for now, but I knew it wouldn't be long before it came back. It always did. As I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, I realized something. The town of Pine Hill wasn't just a place. It was a living thing, feeding off the souls of those it claimed. The shadows that watched from the trees were not mere figments of my imagination. They were real. They were waiting. I turned away from the fairgrounds, knowing that Pine Hill would never let go. And as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me, something I had unleashed by confronting the darkness. Whatever it would never stop haunting me, and it was always watching, always waiting. The town may have been forgotten by many, but it would never forget me. The curse would never end. The story of Pine Hill, a town that seemed forgotten by time, reveals the terrifying truth that some places hold a darkness so deep, it can consume everything that comes into contact with it. The journey of the protagonist, who unknowingly steps into a cursed town, begins with something as innocent as a photo booth at a local fair. Little did they know, this seemingly harmless attraction would pull them into a nightmare that would stretch the boundaries of time, reality, and human understanding. From the first eerie photo strip, where an uninvited figure appeared in a photo frame, the protagonist is thrust into a web of strange occurrences. Each person connected to the town, Lena, Jordan, Casey, vanishes, one by one, leaving behind nothing but haunting memories and a chilling sense of being watched. The mystery deepens as the protagonist uncovers clues that point to something far darker than they had ever imagined. The photo booth, a once innocuous relic, turns out to be a tool of manipulation, a mechanism that traps souls in an endless cycle of despair. As the protagonist delves deeper into the mystery, they begin to realize that the town, the photo booth, and the sinister figure were all connected in a ritualistic pattern that spanned generations. It wasn't just a curse, it was a calculated hunt, a hunt for souls that would fuel the malevolent force behind the town's twisted history. In their search for answers, the protagonist learns that they are not simply investigating a haunted town. They are part of a much larger, more terrifying plan that has been set in motion long before their arrival. Through a mix of fear, desperation, and a sense of duty, the protagonist eventually confronts the figure, the embodiment of the town's dark force. But even when it seems like they have broken free, the final chilling revelation strikes. The curse isn't just bound to the town. It's now following them, reaching out to claim them, because once you've seen it, it never lets you go. The lesson of Pine Hill is clear. Some things, once unleashed, cannot be put back. The past is alive, and it will always find a way to haunt you, whether you like it or not. What does this story teach us about our lives today? First, it speaks to the dangers of ignoring the past. The town of Pine Hill may have seemed like a small, harmless place, but its dark secrets were buried deep beneath the surface. Our past shapes our present in ways we may not fully understand. The protagonist's journey teaches us that when we ignore the shadows of our history, they grow stronger, waiting for the right moment to strike. In life, we cannot simply sweep our traumas, mistakes, or fears under the rug and expect them to vanish. They will always find a way to resurface, often when we least expect it. Another lesson from this story is the importance of confronting fear. The protagonist's initial hesitation to face the dark force of Pine Hill mirrors many of our own struggles. We tend to avoid discomfort, and we may shy away from situations that force us to confront uncomfortable truths. But just like the protagonist learned, only by confronting the fear can we hope to break free from its hold. In the end, avoiding the problem only makes it grow stronger. Lastly, the story of Pine Hill reminds us that there is power in community and connection. The protagonist was alone in their investigation, isolated by the mysterious events unfolding around them. They faced unimaginable horrors without the support of others, and it's clear that this isolation made their situation far worse. It's a stark reminder that we cannot face our darkest moments alone. No matter how scary or uncertain the path may seem, we need to reach out for support. Our connections with others are what keep us grounded, even when the world around us begins to unravel. Now, as we reflect on this chilling tale, I urge you to take these lessons to heart. Don't ignore the shadows lurking in your own past. Confront your fears and embrace the support of those around you. Only then can you begin to heal and move forward. And if this story left you with a chill running down your spine, be sure to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark to support our channel. With your help, we can continue sharing these eerie tales, uncovering the mysteries that haunt our world. Your support drives us to bring you more dark and unsettling stories that you won't find anywhere else. So don't wait, subscribe now, and join us as we venture into the unknown, where the past never truly dies.